All right, welcome. Well, and gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stCenturyWire.com. Thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of this weekly omnibus news and analysis radio program brought to you here on ACR. This is episode 404 of the Sunday Wire. This is a special roadshow edition. We're calling it COVID World Roadshow because we couldn't figure out a suitable title for this week. And we're broadcasting live from Northern Ireland, and specifically in the historic city of Derry in Northern Ireland. And we've got a fantastic panel of guests. We're going to be joined in studio. We managed to put together a road studio for this trip. We've got a lot of new tools and equipment here that we're sort of doing a dry run on. Hopefully it's going to be good and it's going to be sounding good. Hopefully get a thumbs up from our producer back there at the ACR HQ mothership in Austin, Texas. Give us a signal if that's sounding good. Excellent. And we're going to have the guests filtering in. We just did a live event in front of the Guildhall in Derry, and there was also an event yesterday in Belfast in front of the City Hall. Very good events, all successful. And we got a few esteemed speakers who's going to be joining us here in just a few minutes. Some of them have already drifted in here. I've got a special guest with me I'll introduce in a moment. But the theme of these events, obviously, you can imagine what the issue is. I don't know what to call these events other than pro-freedom rallies, because it's really just come down to basic human rights, basic freedoms, and the things that we took for granted for so long that were sort of yanked out from under our feet over the last 2 years. Yeah, we're talking about the pseudo-pandemic, and we got a few special, hopefully a few special surprises for you this week. So we're in a special venue in Derry right now, actually upstairs in a pub, and it's a great venue. And thankfully, the people who helped organize this, they've been very hospitable to us. So we want to say thank you very much to the staff here as well. But I've got our first guest who's going to be joining us in a minute. Just pop those headphones on there, and we've got a gentleman by the name of David McCollum. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, thank you, Patrick.
And I don't know what title to give you, David. We'll just, safe. I'll just call you a health advocate for starters. But if you want to just introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name's David McCollum. I'm a naturopath, and I go by the name of the Healthy Gut Guru.
Healthy Gut Guru. I like the sound of this already, because this is where I'm heading in my sort of personal research and knowledge is down to the gut, because the more I'm learning, David, about this part of human health, the more I'm realizing how important it is, and that our brain, if you will, the real brain, if you want to put it that way, in terms of your physiology, it's not necessarily only between your ears, right? It's down in the gut.
Yeah, there's 10 times more connections between the gut cells and the brain than the other way about. We talk about the gut being the second brain, when in fact it's actually the first brain, because in terms of development, it developed from the food tube, and then the second brain is the cerebral brain. It developed afterwards. It's interesting. We've been living using the germ theory for this last 150 years, and without those so-called germs and bacteria, we as human beings could not function at all. A human cell has approximately 30,000 genes. An earthworm has approximately 70,000 genes. And between the 100 and 1,000 trillion microorganisms that live in the gut, they contribute 3.5 million genes. And there's crosstalk between those bacterial microorganisms and our gut cells. And in fact, we use 90% of the bug DNA to function. So in fact, most of us are only actually 2% human, and some of us less if they are in the government.
So, right. Well, that's what we're going to get onto that in a minute. So suffice to say, just to boil that down, the gut biome, the gut brain, it's not a tertiary function, it's central. Right.
Absolutely pivotal to health. Hippocrates said that food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And he also believed that all disease originated in the gut. Now, I'm not sure about all disease, but certainly I would say a good 80 to 90% of chronic lifestyle diseases are mediated through gut dysfunction and through poor diet. And in fact, the research coming out of Japan, out of South Korea, where they have actually looked at the microbiome in response to COVID, SARS-CoV-2. They've shown that there are certain distributions of bacteria like bifidobacteria, Faecalibacterium progenitii, Akkermansia muciniphila. These bacteria play an essential role in providing your first line of defense against any pathogens and viruses. So 70% of your immune system actually resides in your gut and in the associated mucosal tissue called the mucosal associated lymphoid tissue that lines your nose, your lungs, and your gastrointestinal tract.
So that the terrain, germ versus terrain debate is fascinating, and I've gone more deeply into that in the last year or so because of this crisis. It's opened my eyes to so many different things that I didn't even consider before. And now a lot of people, not just myself, but you're probably noticing they're putting the pieces together, they're putting the puzzle together and realizing there's more to this story of human health and human beings than allopathic and pharmaceutical interventions. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, your immunity and your immune system is not found in a syringe, and certainly not through a modified mRNA technology that focuses, it's a one-trick pony, and it focuses on one thing only, and that's to create a cytotoxic spike protein, which is responsible for most of the symptoms of SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. So what we're putting in supposedly to save us is actually wrecking our health and destroying our immune system.
That's the real pandemic.
That is the real pandemic.
Yeah. So to tell us, David, what brought you out? What were you talking about today? Had a nice crowd in front of the Guildhall in Derry. It was a great crowd, basically, and everybody out there was very focused on the issues and important issues. And this unlike other protest kind of movements, if you will, that I've seen in the past with the anti-war issue, for instance. That's something that I was very active on over the years. This is totally different. This is a totally different situation now, where there's a totally different kind of people coming together, different types of people from different stratas of society. There seems to be no barriers, and you can't generalize who's going to show up and who's not. You got white collar, you got blue collar, you got every collar. So tell me about what you talked about today, and what you think generally about some of the events that you've attended, spoken at.
Okay, well, certainly for me, like most people, when this whole pandemic began last year, I was afraid. You know, I think most of us would have been foolish not to say we've seen people collapsing in China, and we've seen we've seen Italy getting locked down really quickly. At the same time, my son, who is actually a pureblood, I mean, like, he's never been vaccinated, because I've done my vaccine research 22 years ago. And at that time, having researched it quite intensively, I realized for our child, we did not want to go down the road of using experimental. It's hard to know with vaccines, because the pharmaceutical industry has gotten away with so much for so many years, including lying about the potential risks and side effects of the standard vaccines that we know of. So we decided not to vaccinate my son. He still gets sick occasionally. The only difference is his immune system fights it off. So at the beginning of this March 2020, my son took really ill, persistent cough, swollen glands, temperature of 106. He lives in the south of England. They couldn't get any paracetamol. They couldn't get any flour. They couldn't get any toilet rolls. You couldn't get anything. Everyone had panic buyed everything. So we superdosed him with vitamin D, zinc, manuka honey, natural antivirals. Within 6 days, he was better. Now, we never got a definitive diagnosis. It was diagnosed over the phone that he had glandular fever. Well, even if he did, he made a fantastic recovery, because normally glandular fever drags on for weeks and weeks. And I think that's maybe because his immune system has never been damaged by any adjuvants or any other vaccines per se, and he eats a healthy diet, and he loves his food, and he supplements well. So I hope that's the reason, or I believe that's the reason why he recovered quickly. But So we went into lockdown, and within 3 or 4 weeks, I'm starting to say to myself, why are they not talking about natural immunity? Why are all they talking about is, we're already making vaccines in inverted commas to get us out of this crisis. This will be the answer to all your problems. And then obviously in the news, we heard about all these darker skinned doctors and nurses dying from SARS-CoV-2. Quite quickly, the research came out about vitamin D and the fact that, well, if you're dark-skinned, you make 10% of the vitamin D that a white Caucasian does. And as we live in the Northern Hemisphere and we don't get much sunlight, a lot of us are suboptimal for vitamin D as it is. But if you're dark-skinned and you're suboptimal and then you're making 10% of what you normally should, you're going to have real problems.
And you're not supplementing, so they're going into deficiency levels, yeah.
And obviously the other cohort that are going to be very vitamin D deficient, all those elderly people locked up in nursing homes. Why aren't we vitamin D testing them in the nursing homes and putting them on a high dose of vitamin D and zinc rather than giving them end-of-life care with midazolam and... Well, that's a whole different...
Well, in the old days, the sanitariums, what was the prescription? It was outdoors, sit outside for X amount of hours, read outside, and eat healthy. That's what they did in the old days, right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that because when I started work, I actually qualified as a physio in 1988, and I worked in Margate. And I worked in the old Royal Sea Bathing Hospital. Okay. So where they used to take all the infirm and put them in their wheelchairs and take them out to the sea and give them proper hydrotherapy with saline water. And I think that's what we're going to end up going back to.
Yeah. Well, so there's some wisdom in the traditional simple solutions that were time tested. So people knew this. This was handed down. This is pre-allopathic pharmaceutical industrial complex, right?
Absolutely. Like the number of natural health hospitals and, homeopathy, naturopathy, etc., that existed in America prior to Standard Oil and Rockefeller and all those ones coming in and saying a buck to be made out of making synthetic drugs out of the oil. The people who control the oil industry control the pharmaceutical industry, control everything. And I think more and more people are starting to wise up and realize the one thing you need to do during this whole thing is just follow the money.
Yeah, no, that's a simple solution to get to at least part of the issue. But we got a couple more guests here. We're just going to invite around the table. We've got Dr. Anne McCluskey here. Anne, if you go over here and just sit across there. And I think we've got Gregory Sharkey. Greg, do you want to join us? Or are you okay? Yeah. So we got another seat for another guest here. So we got a few people arriving, and so you gave a pretty powerful speech. Obviously, you're wearing some heavy symbology there, but it's provocative, but it's effective, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I wear a yellow star on my coat as an indicator to people that to let them know that this is where it began in Germany. It didn't begin with Auschwitz. It began with segregation, discrimination. It began with show us your papers, it's for your safety, it's for your health.
It began with rumors that they're infected with, that's how it started.
The gypsies and the Jews are spreading disease, yeah. But like those of us who have decided not to take the experimental V, I was actually thinking as well as wearing my yellow star going around with my little bell ringing it.
Yeah.
On clean.
Well, sometimes if you want to get the message across, sometimes you have to push the envelope a little bit.
But unfortunately, there's some people who decided to troll me and call me quite rude names, thinking, that I'm being disparaging towards the Jewish people, the Israelis. It is quite ironic that the country that has the highest vaccination rate is Israel. And as of 2 weeks ago, 55% of the adult population were going to lose their COVID pass status because they were refusing the booster.
And they were the most vociferous on imposing the vaccine passport from the beginning as well.
Absolutely.
So that is ironic, and in the long run, we'll say it could be said it's tragic.
It is, and obviously there are a few people from Israel who are getting onto some of the social media sites to let us know the reality of what is happening. Yeah. Similar, I think the truth's now starting to come out about Australia. Now we're starting to see millions of people in Australia saying enough is enough. And I can't believe the draconian rules and the despots who are running the states and the government there. And New Zealand is the same.
Yeah. You know, the number one tennis player in the world, Novak Djokovic, was just deported today. The vindictive health minister, was so incensed that the court found in Djokovic's favor, allowing him to play as an unvaccinated entrant with a valid exemption visa. The vindictive minister overturned that unilaterally by executive. And guess what? It wasn't because he was deemed a public health threat or risk. It was because they were worried that he would inspire the anti-vax movement in Australia. That's the reason they gave. Okay. So what does that tell you about this whole circus? It's not about public health, is it?
It's never
was
been about public health. Anne and I spoke together at the very first meeting a year and a half ago in Derry, and we've become good friends. And you know, but people are
some strange buds in my house over the past 18 months.
But it's great to see more and more people are waking up. You know, when I see other countries, you know, I have to remember how far we have come in this last year, from 50 till several hundred and several thousand in Belfast. I would still like to see more people come out. I'm sure Anne, like myself, there's other things we'd rather be doing at the weekend, but this is too important.
Yeah.
You know, I do this for my son, and I do this for our children. You know, my parents are 83 and 80. They've both been double jabbed. They do take all the immune supplements I give them, which is great. They've had their booster, and thankfully they haven't had any ill effects from that. But I do this for my son. I do this for the children. I'm disgusted at the thought that any parent thinks it's okay to put this poison in their child for something that has a 0.001% risk. You know, Dr. Ryan Cole, who's a fantastic pathologist in America, he said, for every one child you'll save with this experimental V, you're going to kill 117. Yeah. For every 1.2 million that you inject in this cohort from 5 to 11, 5 to 10,000 will end up with myocarditis. Yeah. And we know what the end result of that is.
I would be slightly more merciful, though, to the people. Nobody on this earth will damage their child on purpose. These people have been psychologically damaged and programmed, and they have not been allowed to hear. You and I mean, I'm sure, like myself, you spend, you know, hours every day researching stuff and reading scientific papers and, you know, trying to make sure that you have the facts straight in your head and all the rest. But most people hear Stephen Nolan, the man who said Novak Djokovic was a threat to health. Stephen Nolan has a body mass index of 50.
BBC Ulster, right? Your radio host, second highest paid BBC employee, right? Yeah. And his name's Stephen Nolan. Is he a picture of health? By the way, this is Dr. Anne McCluskey joining us now on the round table here in Derry for the special Sunday Wire Roadshow, and fantastic and inspirational talk you gave today at the steps of the Guildhall in Derry, and you had a great response. Of course, you touched an emotional nerve with the crowd. I think they really resonated with your passion on this. And you've been one of the first early voices, I would say, of a doctor, a practicing doctor, and coming out when it was very unpopular to do so.
That situation hasn't really improved a lot. I think I saw this pretty early on. I mean, at the time, I had sort of retired from general practice. I was a GP in Derry for 30 years, and it was brilliant. I loved every minute of it. I loved the people, loved my town. And believe it or not, I really care about them. That might sound a bit cheesy for a doctor, but they were my friends as well as my patients. And as a GP, you have a fair amount of autonomy. You know, you actually go into the surgery, you close the door, and you practice medicine more or less as you want. And I would like to think that a lot of the time I was trying to get people off some of the pharmaceuticals and on to, you know, sort of a more holistic and person-centered way of addressing illness. But in the last 2 years, I have reappraised, you know, from someone who was, in inverted commas, an allopathic doctor. And we were driven by protocols and drop-down menus. That was beginning to creep in. And certainly I was privileged, as I say, that I'm old enough to have, qualified before that stuff started. And you were able to kind of resist it. And it was very much driven by money. And I do believe that the way that medicine is taught now is, again, I went to university in 1975, like it's like the Stone Ages. And at that time, there wasn't that incestuous relationship. I mean, I'm sure it existed at some level, but there wasn't the whole takeover of universities and of academia and of, the medical specialties by the as I say, the revolving door of the big pharmas and academia now I speak with one voice. And we see it not only in the COVID narrative, but in the climate narrative and in, almost everything, and that's why the UK column are brilliant at this, looking behind the scenes. Where are the conflicts of interest? Where's the money coming from? If you follow the money, then all of a sudden things become very, very clear. So as I say, I think the other thing that happened, I'm reading a book at the moment about the destruction of the universities. And when Tony Blair said that, that people shouldn't learn trades and that people who were, maybe not academically able should go and get degrees and burden themselves with literally hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt. Young people are coming out of universities now with debt that they have no hope of ever repaying into a job market which actually doesn't value their skills in many cases. Some obviously do well from it, but a lot of people end up disillusioned and bitter. And I was talking to somebody actually whose sons are going to Australia, and they're a plumber and a carpenter, and they said they will get off the plane and walk into highly paid jobs. They of course were ringing me to wonder, was there any way that they could manage to get to Australia? And I'm afraid I told them to stay where you are, son. Stay safe. We're all in this together. But you know what I mean? That trades are devalued. And as I say, a lot of our young doctors come out. My mother worked in Tilly and Henderson shirt factory. Derry, as you may know, was a big shirt factory town. There's a lot of socioeconomic deprivation, but the woman worked in the shirt factories, and she worked on a speed belt during the war and stuff like that. And she was involved in helping to unionise Tilly's factory. And she always told me when I was going to university, I got a grant. And she always said, don't you ever forget, your degree is paid for by the bin men and the coal men, and you owe it back to them. And that ethos, I think, has gone where now, you have to pay, and therefore the world owes you. And I'm not saying this is. I think it's in there, in the way that the medical profession. I don't recognise what I see happening in our hospitals. And a very dear friend of mine was at the rally there today. She's a nurse, and as I was saying, it is the nurses who are having to enforce these ludicrous, anti-human, insane, cruel, dystopian practices. Women and men who know that this is unethical and that but they're the people. This woman told me that during the depths of lockdown, they had to tear people apart when people who'd shared a bed and reared a family for 50 years, when one of them was on death's door. It was her job to tear them apart and say, no, you can't come in, and listen. And I know, again, in other places where nurses in the middle of the night brought people up the porter's stairs, up the back stairs, up the back elevator, and allowed them to hug and kiss one another and say their goodbyes at the risk of losing their job. How do we get here? How do we get to a society that says that the preservation of life to stop contamination means that you throw out every fundamental ethical principle of medicine and nursing and midwifery too, where they're the coercion that women who are pregnant are coming under to take this experimental therapy it beggars belief.
The talking point is that pregnant women, we're being bombarded with this now. Pregnant women are at risk of COVID. Have you seen this?
FOI from the trusts here. Elisa's nodding frantically in the corridor. How many women are in hospital with COVID? How many are in needing supported care? How many are in intensive care? How many are ventilated? None, and none. I'm sorry, it's lies. They just make it up. and they get the likes of Swollen Newland, some of our BBC hacks and RTE, and you know, they just put it out there.
And the CDC in America is putting out these kind of, they're mashing up statistics and dressing it up as studies on pregnant women. No, sorry, in America it's pregnant person.
Pregnant person.
You're not allowed to say women,
yes.
But they're doing that, and then we're taking that in the UK. Like it's got some authority, and they're saying, oh, look, this is what the American CDC is saying, or the American FDA. I see a lot of this going on too.
There is, according to Pfizer's own document, there is no safety data in pregnancy. Why would you give a pregnant woman, again, as a medical practitioner, the rule is you don't ever give a pregnant woman anything. Now, you know, and sometimes they ask, look, is it okay if I stay on, for example, my antidepressant medication while I'm pregnant? I've been taking it for years, blah, blah, blah. And what I always say is, my advice is you try and wean yourself off it gradually, because if, God forbid, something goes wrong, for the rest of your life, you'll be wondering, was it that? And as I say, we're saying to pregnant women, you can't have a half a glass of wine, but you can have 50 billion patterns for a spike protein, which we know causes clots and which we know is likely to cross-react with your placenta, and all of that. You know, it's quite weird.
So just to rewind the clock a little bit, when the pandemic, when the lockdown started, you kind of came out of retirement. You wanted to help, right? You got in there, and what were the first things that you saw with your own eyes that's when the alarm bell started going off? Well,
I had worked as a GP in Derry for 30 years, and I did work in Western Urgent Care, which is the out-of-hours centre, you know, where the sort of emergency centre from 6 in the evening. So I went back to Western Urgent Care, and I spent the first week there fighting with everybody, because what they had said was, for example, they had all this black and yellow tape, you know, the stuff that triggers fear, everywhere, and they were saying the patients had a queue outside that they weren't allowed to come into their health centre. Sorry, this health centre belongs to the people, doesn't belong to the people who work there. And the people had a queue outside in the rain, and maybe elderly people. Derry is a city where a lot of people don't have their own cars and would have to come in taxis and sit outside. And I just thought it was completely insane. So we managed to get that overturned. On the first night that I was on duty, there was a call from a woman who said, look, my son hasn't been well for a couple of weeks now. He's really not well. He's losing weight. He looks awful. And the rule with out of hours is usually if it's something that needs investigation, you know, you'd say, well, you know, might be better if you see your GP tomorrow because he's going to need bloods, or he might need whatever investigations. So I was talking to her, and I said, I was saying that, you know, maybe. And she says, look, doctor, I really don't like the look of him tonight. And immediately, if a mother doesn't like the look of her 15-year-old son, that's alarm bells. So I said, bring him in. Immediately, I put him down for an appointment, and immediately an administrator sent me a message on screen saying, doctor, you're not allowed to bring people in unless they're emergencies. And I sort of said, sorry, I'm the clinician here. I make the decision who I see. Anyway, the young fella landed. He was blue. He had a heart rate of 140. He had a respiratory rate of 65. He had a blood sugar of 30. He almost died. He was red lighted. He was resuscitated, IV fluids, put in oxygen, ambulance, red lighted to Altnagalvin, then red lighted to the intensive care unit in Belfast. And at the beginning, right through lockdown, but particularly at the beginning, that was not uncommon. People were saying they were seeing particularly young people with diabetes who were undiagnosed and were ending up needing intensive resuscitation. Thanks be to God, I brought that young man in. So then that was another series of emails saying, you know, and we managed to get that overturned, that the doctor decides who's the emergency, not a secretary up the stairs. So it was kind of a battle. I did surgeries then back in the place where I was working, and the receptionist used to laugh because they were saying there's more people in here today than there's been in the last 6 months. People, stupid things like getting your ears syringed, if you need that done so that you can hear properly, that's considered now high risk. Now, syringing ears is always kind of high risk because you might get hit by a bit of flying earwax and it's not pleasant. It's the only thing I would put on an apron for. But, it's just nonsense. People are not getting the stuff that needs done. And as I was saying at the rally, the GP out of hours COVID assessment centre is and took over the entire of the main outpatients in Altnagalvin Hospital. And outpatients that should have a throughput of 300 people a day getting the things that hospitals do sorted. Getting their eyes sorted, getting their, hearing problems, cardiac problems, rheumatic problems, connective tissue diseases, all of the panoply of general medicine that happens and surgical stuff that happens in a hospital, all put in the back burner. No cancer screening. And now we're seeing certainly an increase in all-cause mortality, worryingly, in younger age groups. And I am terrified about what's coming, because some of that is obviously related to the jabba-dabbas. Some of it is obviously related to neglect. And we're seeing, I saw 2 patients where their cancers were at a totally advanced stage, who had not been able to. If you don't feel somebody's belly, you will not feel the big lump in it. If you don't put your finger in it, you'll put your foot in it. These are basic tenets of medicine. You cannot diagnose and treat people over a computer screen. It cannot be done.
Or over a computer screen, which is what so this is what the technocrats and the geniuses up there in the public health offices in government and the politicians, they think that they can, through the wonders of technology, we can do this. We can do remote medical care, and it's going to be more efficient. It's going to save money. This is all about saving money while they're shoveling money out the back door. So this whole idea that COVID has helped streamline healthcare service, there, in my opinion, and having been in the system recently, there's no healthcare going on at all.
Yeah,
that's the reality.
It's painful to hear the stories of people and the way they've been treated. And as I say, I was proud of the NHS, our national religion. And I cannot believe that in such a short space of time, the patient-centered, holistic, supportive, empathetic way that we practice medicine has gone. I really don't know where this has come from, where people are they present in hospital unwell and are told that they cannot access services until they've taken an experimental gene therapy. This is coercion. And if you are coerced into taking something, that's an assault. And really that doctors are prepared to cooperate with something which is so fundamentally antithetical to the way that it should be. People who are ill are vulnerable, and they are suggestible, and they're terrified, and they need, they're not in a position. It's a very unequal relationship, so that the patients really don't have any power. And as I say, these things, we know the molecular biology around them is concerning beyond belief. And we've known for decades that these mRNA technologies do cause vaccine-associated enhanced disease, and are very likely to trigger autoimmune diseases, neurodegenerative diseases. And we're seeing this. I'm sorry. And the thing that really annoys me, I made a video which went all over the place and got me suspended, got my medical license suspended, because I was telling, and I saw a woman with a young woman, a beautiful teenager, with a clot in her arm. I've never seen that in 40 years practicing medicine. And she was told by the hospital consultant that there was no possibility that this was related to her experimental gene therapy, which she'd had 2 days previously. Now, how any person with a basic scientific training can not understand that unless you report everything, you will not see a pattern, that when there is a clinical trial ongoing, there is an ethical requirement for people to describe what they see. That is called science. It's not the science, which says that anybody now who questions stuff is a conspiracy theorist and anti-vaxxer. I'm proud to fall into those categories as currently defined, because I'm afraid I'm a scientist. Yeah.
So David, I know a lot of people tell me if you can corroborate my experience. There's a lot of people I know, they're terrified about the prospect of going into the healthcare system at this point in time for 2 reasons. They know that they might be PCR swabbed and chucked into a COVID ward, even though they're perfectly healthy. And I can attest to you, there's a lot of perfectly healthy people in the COVID ward. And there's that, and then there's also the fear that they're going to be they're not going to get diagnosed properly, because there's a legitimate concern that the whole medical machine is geared towards one thing right now. And it's almost like there's tunnel vision, institutional tunnel vision going on. And I don't blame the doctors, and there's a lot of young doctors and trainees and stuff. They're trying to do their best to comply, and they work hard. The nurses are working their tails off and having to wear layers and layers of PPE. I mean, it's a hellish environment to work in. But there's a lot of people. Imagine that you're scared to get health care, and you're really frightened about that. So how do you view this? Do you view this as potentially, is there a silver lining in this? Could it be that maybe it might drive more people to take more responsibility for preventive health, or what do you think? How do you feel about this?
After this last year and a half, some people have realized that, you have to be accountable for your own health. Most, and I'm sure Anne will agree with me, most of the people who turn up at GP surgeries with lifestyle-related diseases, like chronic health issues, it's really down to lifestyle, diet, nutrition, and my motto is prevention before intervention. I try and stop people getting sick or deal with them if they have chronic health issues. I'm not someone who works with acute health issues, probably because my temperament wouldn't work with it. I'm too passionate. I don't think I could control my. I think it takes a certain degree of measure whenever you get someone having an acute crisis to deal with that. So that my forte is sort of in preventative medicine. I would like to say, yes, I've had a fairly busy year where a lot of people have started to realize that it begins with you, and that, you have to look after your own health. A lot of them just don't know where to start. Again, it's the brainwashing. Well, it's constant bombardment. You walk into supermarkets and you're hit by processed foods left, right, and centre. So in the midst of one of the biggest health crises of the century, we keep the off licenses down. The takeaway is open.
You shut them for a day or two and decided that wasn't going to work.
Or down south, you can't drink after 8 o'clock. That'll save the day,
Start earlier.
Yeah, right.
So it's challenging because, like, some people will work with me and say, "Oh, you charge a lot of money," and what value is your health worth? The only time I think people really value their health when they're coming towards the end of their life, or they have an acute crisis. The rest of the time, they're not even aware of, like I spend a lot of money. I
would get a bit concerned, though, that we're raising a nation of kind of hypochondriacs, too, because, you actually can put too much emphasis on health. Most people don't need to even think about it until, hopefully, I mean, that's not fair. There obviously are people who have health challenges from day dot. But for the vast majority of us, I would be a bit iffy about needing all these supplements and I just think if you eat pretty healthily and stay pretty active and kind of look at, nature will provide most of what we need, and be happy is vital.
Well, I might disagree with you slightly there, Anne, because maybe if we go back to World War II, where people were eating crops that were grown from scratch, fertilized with natural fertilizer, the level of micronutrients in our food today is so low because everything's grown fast using, fertilizers, which will make plants grow, but if you don't keep topping up the topsoil with manure and stuff, you're not going to replenish the nutrients. But even like the benefits of actually going out and getting fresh air and vitamin D from sunlight, and I think, and also if you go back to school, when I didn't do home economics, but a lot of the ones going through school would have done home economics, known how to cook. How many people?
I missed those lessons too, I'm afraid.
But an awful lot of people, particularly those people who are, economically, they have a lower income. You can go out and buy fresh vegetables and a chicken, and it costs you £6 to make a meal for you and your 4 kids. Yeah. Or you can go down to McDonald's and spend 25 quid in a Happy Meal. and they've no money to spend it, but that's what they'll do.
It's a myth, isn't it, that buying, shopping organic, eating organic is more expensive. It's actually, if you actually do the math, it's not actually if you do it at home.
In one of the local McDonald's outlets here, just after they opened again, they actually had a new traffic management arrangement, and these are people who are obsessed about their health. And they were queued. There was 3 lanes of traffic queued to get in to get whatever they sell in there. Thanks be to God, I know nothing about it. But we're talking about the dismantlement of the health service. And I mean, I don't mind saying this because it's no secret. I actually ran a GP type surgery out of my front sitting room because people could not get help, particularly for children. Very often, if a mother's concerned about a child with a wee rash or wee cough or whatever, all they want is somebody to say, your Wayne's grand, they're fine. Listen to their chest, reassure them. And it was, in order for that to happen, they were going to have to go to hospital, get a PCR test, and maybe spend 14 hours sitting in an A&E with all sorts of other problems. It was, again, it's child abuse. So much of this is focused on, it seems to be sort of deliberately designed to harm children and young people. Another story when I was back in the surgery is I was there and I saw a child. I was talking to a psychologist actually at the rally today about this. I saw a wee one of maybe 11 months or a year old, and as you do, you go over and coochie coo, and who's a beautiful girl, and her face froze and she just looked at me, and her mother said, Anne, I don't think she's ever seen anybody except me and her daddy who not wearing a mask. I went down to the surgery and cried because there are so many children who have not seen, they haven't seen a smile, they haven't seen, except from for their immediate contacts, they have not seen an unmasked human face. What are we doing to our children? What are we doing to their mental health going forward? My granddaughter comes to chapel with me, and after the first lockdown, we're sitting, she loves going up to the front so she can keep an eye and make sure the priest does it properly. And she sits on my knee and she's sitting going, Gani, I'm a cat. And she's licking her hand and rubbing her face. And then she's licking my face. And you could see everybody looking up and just a horror on their faces. They're all going to die. No, we'll be fine. And the same wee girl she's a dog, and she eats Nutella and smears it all over her face, and then she closes her wee eyes and the dog cleans her face for her, and I'm going, yeah, she's going to be dead healthy. So it is about, we were talking about microbiome and contact with bacteria. Our immune system is the most phenomenal piece of kit. And, vaccines, most people who come across this, whatever it is, shrug it off. It doesn't get past the middle of their nose, and it's sorted. You have your killer T cells and all of this beautiful stuff in your gut, the acid in your stomach. We are bomb-proof in terms of respiratory infections, and only as we know from the COVID thing, the average age is older than the average age of all-cause mortality, and most people are already metabolically challenged, like our friend, the radio presenter. This in the Belfast Trust, again, I'm on about freedom of information because I love them. How many people were there who only had COVID? In the Belfast Trust, this is about 400,000 patients, had COVID only on their death cert. How many? Guesses anybody? 2 people. Fact. Nonsense. And
yes, but if we can save just one life, Anne, it's all worth it, don't you? Have a heart.
All right, I am.
Have a heart.
I am
what
such a bitch.
Cruel
Did
individual.
you see the meme too about the boy with the arrow through his head, and the doctor says it looks like a severe case of arrow through the head, but we better do a PCR test just in case. And that is what's going on, and that whole reattribution, the fact that the flu vanished. I mean, how stupid do they think we are? Well, obviously they think we're pretty stupid. But as I say, getting back to the whole behavioural team, there is a nudge unit in the north as well. You have the Cabinet Office and the whole 77 Brigade and the whole behavioural. We have one here too. We have homegrown boys, and they've written papers about how on the island of Ireland, we've it's cross-border, which is really, really wonderful. So they're brainwashing us on both sides of the border. It's really heartening to know. And they say this, they publish papers. How can we make these people change their behaviour?
Where are they based? The northern
Queen's University, Belfast and Coleraine, but they probably have an offshoot in UCD. And I would love to see that. That'd be an interesting little exercise to see where the funding streams for that lot come from.
The government is run by NEFIT down south. I mean, they've literally hijacked the government. It's unbelievable.
That's
the equivalent of SAGE,
Yeah.
the Science Committee, the Star Chamber in the UK.
And the list of conflicts of interest and the revolving door between these big pharmaceutical companies and big tech companies and politicians. And I mean, one of the SDLP women here, her husband is up to his neck in PCR tests, and it's incredible. It really is.
What about Mary Lou McDonald, Sinn Féin leader, whose brother and sister are both involved heavily in the pharmaceutical industry? Her sister is head of purchasing for Novartis.
Yeah.
There'd be no conflict of interest there, of course.
None.
Head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, her husband.
Her husband as well.
He's an industry guy there. So, I mean, it's just rife, isn't it?
It's bad, but the thing is, governments don't have any money. It's the people. It's the children and grandchildren. It's they who are paying for this, and and that's before we even go down the road of where this is all taking us, where this these vaccine passports are and what actually the agenda is behind that. I was the freedom of information that we did for the local trust here. I talked about it today. There's about 300,000 patients in the Western Health and Social Care Trust, and this year they spent £3.58 million on PCR tests, which tell absolutely nothing. All they do is give the ghouls in the media sort of numbers for their fear porn machine. It's spectacular. They have not achieved any positive health outcomes for anyone. They've destroyed education, destroyed small businesses, destroyed society, and made a few of the government's friends very wealthy, and given the like of Stephen Nolan and Creepy Crawley, stuff to terrorise us with. It's bizarre. That in a health system that says it's under pressure, where not one where the capacity is down by at least 30% from when I qualified in medicine. It's beyond belief.
If you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and that's where we're at.
Well, at the end of 2019, we had 5,700 beds available in Northern Ireland across all the different trusts. When we're running at 105% or 110% capacity, they keep ramping up how under pressure the hospitals are. They're running at 110% capacity on 3,300, 3,400 beds. Yeah. So we're down 2,300 beds. 2018 was a really bad flu season. The flu vaccine did not work. And hospitals were on their knees, because my father was in one of the hospitals, Craigavon Area Hospital. He was in twice that January. One of the times he was in, he spent 36 hours on a trolley. Yeah. And that's when we had full capacity. That's when we had full nursing capacity. Mm-hmm. We are under crisis, under pressure.
The winter.
It's called the winter. It's called the flu. People tend to think I may not have empathy, because one of the things that really frustrates me about this whole COVID thing is that if you have been unfortunate to have lost someone to SARS-CoV-2, it's almost now like it's a badge of honor. It's like that person who died from cancer, their death was less significant. That person who died from a heart attack or a stroke, the only kid in the block is COVID. The only diagnosis and death is COVID. And that really sticks in my throat. When I'm getting trolled by people, oh, you wouldn't feel the same if you'd look. The same people who would die in their 80s from the flu are the same people who were at risk from SARS-CoV-2. There is no excess mortality. Yeah. The statistics, and we keep rolling the statistics out to support everything we say, and this is from Worldometer, from all of these different, sets of statistics. And even when you present it to them, they just ignore it. Even when we talk, this is the one that gets me. So if you die within 28 days of a positive COVID test, you go down as having died with or from COVID. Yet when we mention VAERS, which we know records probably at most 1%, maybe 2%, and we're sitting in America at 8,500 deaths on the VAERS system. Yeah. And they're saying, well, you need to actually multiply that anywhere between 31 and 40 times to get a true number. then the likes of Stephen Nolan, our great esteemed health ambassador, will say to it, well, just because they were down on the yellow card system of ours, it doesn't mean that they died from that. Yes, Stephen, we don't know because you aren't doing postmortems. In the same way, you're not doing postmortems for anyone who died with a positive COVID test, but you're quite happy to use the statistics for that to support how bad this is. When we say, well, what about this? And we know the doctors don't have time. 30 to 40 minutes to fill in a yellow card.
You get good at them after a while.
Unless you're really efficient, like. But it's the same in America. In America, because most of the doctors, obviously, in the private sector, there's no sort of NHS per se. They don't have 30 to 40 minutes to sit down, filling in, and halfway through filling in the virus form, the computer collapses and have to start over again. That's why we're never seeing the truth,
I think it's worse than that, David, though. There is actually a refusal to acknowledge connections. I'm sorry, it's not just the time.
No, I agree with that.
They're avoiding, a lot of them, medical professionals avoiding reporting because they don't want to go there for a number of reasons. But that's a fact. And there's a paper written by Harvard a few years ago that shows it's only a small percentage of what's out there in the population in terms of the reporting of adverse reactions. So you scale that up to 80% of what you've got, and that's probably more like the true number.
Yeah, that was the Harvard study done between two things.
Bizarrely, people who have classical problems which are attributable, and we know that these are caused by damage from the injections, are actually themselves denying a connection and saying, oh, well, it would have been a lot worse. Because again, that's that brainwashing, that total contortion of any connection with reality. And it's been on the hour, every hour for people watching TV now for a year and a half, and it's extremely effective.
So when somebody says, their death would have been so much worse if they hadn't had the vaccine, and you're like, what level of just brainwashing or stupidity? I don't know what is it. I feel like banging my head against a brick wall sometimes.
So right now we're broadcasting live in Derry. I'm here with David McCollum, Dr. Anne McCloskey. We're broadcasting live on HGR from Derry in Northern Ireland. We're going to take a short network break, and we've got a couple of more guests that are going to join the conversation here on this roundtable special Sunday Wire Roadshow episode. And I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We will be right back in just a few minutes, and there's going to be a PSA from Dr. Fauci over the break, so we can't wait to hear that. We'll be right back.
I'll make our government open and transparent.
Tired of being lied to by Washington? Tired of being hoodwinked by the mainstream media?
The press is so dishonest.
Then go to 21stcenturywire.com for the very best U.S. and international news and analysis. Also for premium reports, podcasts, videos, and documentaries, subscribe and become a member at 21wire.tv. Visit www.21stcenturywire.com.
This is Dr. Fauci reminding you to stay safe this winter season. I wouldn't do any traveling to see your family. In fact, the only traveling I would do would be going to the doctors to get your booster. I would even recommend getting between 15 and 20 boosters at once to kind of get ahead of the variants that will be coming right around the curve. So get ahead of that. Stay home, isolate, put a bag over your head, 10 masks, hide in the closet, and stay warm, but also keep the windows open to keep the ventilation going. We should be back open by the year 2056, no problem.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21st Century wire.com. Thank you for rejoining us. Remember, this is a live broadcast. If you're just tuning in midstream, you can catch us afterwards on the podcasting platforms. We'll be up on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and all the major podcasting platforms a few hours after the show. So don't worry if you're just joining us midstream here. Now, before the break, we were talking to Dr. Anne McCloskey. We're also talking to David McCollum, and we're talking about a lot of these issues relating to the pandemic. We're here in Derry, in Northern Ireland. We got a few new guests joining us around the table here. The first of which I'm going to go to one of the event organizers joining us here, Gregory Sharkey. And Greg, this is my second trip to Derry. I came here with you the first time a couple years ago, Imperialism on Trial. Great event. We also did an event in Belfast. And those were the days, weren't they, when we were just worrying about what was going on overseas. Now we're in a whole new sort of thing right now. Now the war has kind of come home in a way, hasn't it?
Absolutely, Patrick. And thanks for having me on your show. And thanks to all the other guest speakers. But yeah, we started with Imperialism on Trial, and you've spoken at 5 of those. Like, as you just mentioned there, our concerns were on foreign shores in Syria, Palestine, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the other potential regime changes in places like Venezuela, Iran, the antagonism towards Russia, the continual Russophobia, and the like, and the Russia baiting, and with Ukraine, and now it's back on the table very much so with Ukraine and with Belarus, and more recently Kazakhstan. As you say, look, our concerns then were on foreign shores. We also run events, Imperialism on Trial, Free Julian Assange. We were always campaigning for things that were external, things that were far away. And in February, late February, early March 2020, we were, the writing was on the wall. We spotted it straight away. We seen what imperialism's taken a new track, and it was what I would call pharmaceutical imperialism to begin with, and then for the ultimate aim of corporate totalitarianism. And everything that we were warning about back in February, March of 2020 has transpired, and we've seen, we knew that these were continual vaccinations and to make money for big pharma, but there's other agendas there, and I'll not maybe go into those other agendas, but we're all very well aware of the potential and the serious illnesses and deaths that are arising from these so-called vaccines. But what we had observed before with regards to imperialism was it was a slow process, and it quite often, whenever it went from soft power to hard power, they had to use the military or use proxies like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. This new type of imperialism that has now been subjected across the world, they didn't need to roll out a tank, nor fire one bullet, nor sponsor any proxy military terrorist organizations. And we're seeing a coup d'etat. We knew that it was a coup d'etat to begin with, and it's transpired that very much in that light.
And Andrei Vilcek, a great dissident writer who sadly passed away last year, he said in an interview before he died, he said that the powers of the big global powers were done running out of places to colonize abroad, and now they're colonizing their own countries and people at home.
Yeah, well,
is that a safe thing to say?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Now, I would mark the year 2014 as a change as for these Western imperialist regime changes when the Russians got involved in Syria. Ironically, there's been attempts, but there hasn't been another regime change across the world since the failed attempt that they had on Syria. We've seen Juan Guaido, that whole debacle has dropped off the radar. They failed in their attempts with Iran and other countries. So there hasn't been a regime change since 2014, since the Russian involvement and drawing a red line in Syria. So we haven't seen this scripted regime changes, but they have moved on to a much bigger platform, and it's a global regime change.
Yeah, a global coup d'état.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
is. It is.
Yeah.
We were just talking about in the South, and we've got another guest joining us here. I'll say to my next guest before I introduce her, I was saying that south of the border that there has been a coup d'état, and this NEFIT organization has taken over the business of ruling the country. We're talking about the Republic of Ireland. Not just a few miles, we're from the border right now in Donegal.
Meters?
So we're right there. And I'm joined by a surprise guest. We didn't know she was going to make it. She had a long way to travel, and she's the hardest working person in I think one of the hardest working people that we all know in this effort. We'll call it an effort. Pro-freedom effort, and to oppose all the things that we are talking about today at the event in Derry and yesterday in Belfast. Dolores Cahill is joining us around the round table here.
It's lovely to be with you all, and I'm a great fan of all that you do as well, and of course everyone here in the UK, Colin. Yeah.
So Dolores, and you've made it here, and I know you just drove quite a few hours to get here. So.
Yes, I did. I had another visit from our friends in Blue, the Garda Síochána, today at my house as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And were they coming to check to see how you were, looking in on you?
They were, because Anne and I have been sending a lot of notices of liability for harm and death over the past year, and also asking questions, I guess. In one care home in the west of Ireland, 26 of 51 people died within 5 weeks of been administering these injections in January, the 20th of January, 2021. 8 of them died within 48 hours and 19 within 2 weeks. And in that care home, on average, 2 people died per year. So I've been asking questions, I guess, is why are the police not investigating that? And in a clinical trial, as all these injections are in the world, if 26 or less than 50 people died, the clinical trials should be stopped. So I guess what all of us are doing around the world is taking a good hard look at the police and the courts and the judges and the Supreme Court judges in our countries, and whether they are really upholding the rule of law. So really, I think this injection and clinical trial is a distraction from the undermining of justice and equity and the rule of law for hundreds of years, but particularly in the last 2 generations.
Yeah, because, law enforcement, when the government passes decrees and diktats and policies, they're just words, but someone has to enforce them. So law enforcement are very important because they're the teeth of the state. But if they're enforcing policies that are unconstitutional, that are against international treaties and conventions for human rights, or the Nuremberg Codes, for instance, there's a number of treaties, and I'm sure you can name all of them, then there's a problem. Something is broken down. Something is fundamentally wrong with society, not just Northern Ireland, not just Ireland, England, US, Canada, Australia, France, Germany, Italy. The scale of this is unbelievable. I mean, when you step back, and I know you've looked at this from a global perspective, you've traveled and you've been to different countries. What are your feelings about the scale of this, and what is the best way to approach this issue, in your opinion?
Well, just first briefly to say the scale, I suppose, and then I'm very happy to focus on solutions, because I think someone gave me an analogy, actually, that it's like if you have a husband and he knows his wife is having an affair and everyone's telling him, and he's afraid to pick up the phone and make the call because his entire world is going to change. And I think, when people really study, I've been studying the history of justice and the history of the rule of law for really 20 years. And people will find out, over the years, that really what's going on has been going on for almost 2,000 years, particularly since 327. But the undermining of the rule of law has really started around the time of King Henry VIII. And particularly people can look up on legislation.gov.uk, the 1666 CETA QV Act, and the scale of it, but also the solution, is the difference between the legal system and the law. So the difference is the recognition that men and women are more than just like animals, that they have an innate ability to understand morality and they have a conscience. So the rule of law is about equity and justice, so that if somebody harms someone or someone kills someone, that the person that does it is has to be is innocent until proven guilty. There has to be a police and a court system that hold people to account. And so that is the lawful system, and that resonates. And that has been, the way that all nations and all cultures have held people to account for many years. But the so-called legal system that really has been instigated between the Vatican and the elites in the world, particularly coming from the royalty in England in 1666, only recognizes men and women in their bodily form and doesn't actually administer justice. So that, in a way, what we've seen is that the doctors, like Anne, have been suspended for trying to save the lives of people and to prevent harm. And we've been accused, I've been put up in court in London for speaking to more than 7 people outside. I haven't seen the summons, didn't see any evidence. They issued an arrest warrant, put me on trial in my absence, and I could have been put in prison for 10 years in the United Kingdom for speaking to 7 people outside, while we have one of the most lethal clinical trials in the world ongoing. So I think the history of how the legal system is not giving justice has been going on for many years, but the solution then to what's going on is for people to understand the rule of law. And people, you may know that I was able to get rid of all of the checkpoints in Ireland because I simply did a video in 10 minutes and said the police were stopping people coming to the St. Patrick's Day parade. And I said that men and women, whether they're dressed up as police or not, if they are engaging in criminal and unlawful activity, they can be held to account. And I said people should video it. We would take 12 members of the police and we would take a case against them and fine them or charge them for 20 euros. But that would show the principle that men and women engaged in unlawful activity can be held to account in their private and personal capacity. So the solution then is, I'm also working with Philip Hyland in the UK and Dr. Sam White, is just to injunct one man or woman. They can be one doctor or one regulator and hold them to account for the deaths and stillbirths, for example, on these unlawful clinical trials.
And when you say clinical trial, we're talking about the population is part of a giant trial, aren't they, effectively?
Yes, so these what people are calling vaccines, which they're not, or the SARS-CoV-2 mRNA injections, COVID-19 injections. They are all clinical trials. So when I came out around May 2020, even though I had been saying it privately and in my voluntary advisory roles in the world and including in the European Union, that never has one mRNA clinical trial for a vaccine ever been licensed, because in the animal studies, the animals either got very sick or died, and the same for babies. And that I had predicted that you would see huge deaths, but that the people would die from issues like organ failure or where the immune system would attack their organs like the lungs or the heart. This would happen in the weeks and months or a number of years after the injection, and people would present with organ failure, heart attack and sepsis, and that the health system would be calling it COVID-19, which it isn't. It's really an adverse event from these injections. So I don't know if you know that pathologists in Germany have looked at 15 deaths that were not related to the clinical trial or as an adverse event, and 14 of the 15 of them had exactly the antibody-dependent enhancement, or where their immune system is targeted by the mRNA. So, and last year I said, if anyone forcibly injected me, I would say it was contributory manslaughter or potentially murder. And even though I have great hope that I think everybody who has been injected, even with one mRNA, will have their life expectancy reduced by decades.
Mm-hmm. And just to say, what would be the normal procedure? Because what you're talking about is the experiment is running, and we're just collateral damage, and the results will come. Isn't this why you would take 10 years to properly test any kind of product like this before rolling it out? You'd avoid all these problems, wouldn't you?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's very important is, though, that really for any type of medical intervention, it has to be necessary. And I've been studying, this is the 9th pandemic that I've been studying in detail. And I knew it was coming on the 17th and 18th of September 2019. So that was in a month. There's the same signals for when they're going to start a pandemic, because they have to inform their minions or puppets around the world. But 20 years ago, in 2002, 2003, there was a so-called coronavirus pandemic then, the SARS, now called SARS-CoV-1. But there were clinical trials done, and it was already known that hydroxychloroquine was safe and effective, and there was completed clinical trials done in relation to coronaviruses or SARS-CoV-2 in 2005. But hydroxychloroquine is one of, on the World Health Organization essential medicines of the world. It has among the least adverse events in the world. It is regulated and approved and licensed and prescribed everywhere in the world. So that was known for this coronavirus if it exists 20 years ago. So there is absolutely no necessity to have any of these mRNA trials. And in my interviews from May 2020 onwards, I published the papers of the clinical trials and the listing of hydroxychloroquine on the World Health Organization. But of course, good nutrition, sleep, reduction of stress, vitamin D, vitamin C, and then we had the Zelenko protocol, which is hydroxychloroquine and zinc, in February and March of 2020. And there was a survey of 20,000 prescribing doctors in February, March 2020, and they said that in this case, hydroxychloroquine and zinc was the safest and most effective treatment. So I suppose there was no need for the lockdown ever. And there's absolutely no need for these mRNA trials. And that's where we have to move on to justice and the rule of law.
And ditto for ivermectin. And
ditto for ivermectin.
And even antibiotics, Dr. Ann, I want to say this, do you remember when they said, don't take ibuprofen? Do you remember that at the beginning?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a simple anti-inflammatory that if you have some condition, it might keep you out of the hospital. So there was a strategy to don't take anything, just stay at home, and then when your lips turn blue, you can present at accident emergency, and then we'll throw you on a ventilator. I'm giving you a extreme scenario. But
no, that's not an extreme scenario. That actually were the protocols. Incredibly, part of the case that the health board are the pretext upon which they've suspended my license to practice was that I had the audacity to write private prescriptions. Now, first of all, when I'm working, I never take money from anybody. It makes life so much simpler. It means nobody can ever accuse me of being in this for the money. But I was writing for people who were either sick or terrified. I was writing them a prescription for hydroxychloroquine with, protocols, with the clinical history and all of that. And that is part of the case for the reason why I'm suspended. I was trying to help people with stuff, because I've read the papers that were published in 2005, which shows that these are potent inhibitors of SARS coronaviruses.
And you gave that information that's informed consent, right?
Absolutely. And as I say, they went round in these days when the health centre is under such incredible stress. A doctor was appointed to go round every pharmacy in the north and some in Donegal and gather up all these scripts. And as I say, they were all, a lot of them were prophylactically for people who were older and who were very frightened. It's bizarre. And ivermectin, likewise, cheap, effective. We know that, for example, in the bottom of in Uttar Pradesh, the province in India, where these things were used prophylactically, COVID just wasn't an issue. And yet, under threat of losing their license, vets were told that this was not allowed to leak into the human pharmacopoeia from the veterinary medicine side of things, in case it would help. This is the bizarre thing, because obviously if there are effective and safe treatments, then immediately the emergency use authorization for the injectables is null and void and isn't available. And that a health service could actively conspire against using things which are safe, effective, and proven is bizarre beyond comprehension.
And they did it in multiple countries, and it was, I believe, a coordinated effort.
It was.
To do that, and then under an emergency use authorization, the manufacturers of the vaccines have legal immunity. They have liability protection. This is the only reason why this all happened this way.
That's not entirely correct.
Okay,
if
go
that's
ahead.
Okay?
Yes,
so that is,
definitely.
Yeah, that is. So I think there's a lot of things sometimes that just because people say things and repeat them doesn't mean that they're true. So first of all, if you engage in criminal activity, then there is no indemnity. And if it is that there are ingredients in the injections that are either not on the ingredients list, which we know to be the case, but some of the ingredients list and say that they will kill people if in contact with the skin, and these are being injected. And we know that around 1/4 of the people are dying within 2 days of getting the injection, so it's very serious. So I think that's why we have to go back to the rule of law and holding people to account. And simply, these pharmaceutical industry do not have at all indemnity if there is toxic ingredients or if they are causing death. That is criminal behavior. But I think for people, some of the solutions for everyone listening around the world is that you can go to the medical council, as with Philip Hyland, they've written to the regulator, or the medical council is whoever is writing to Dr. Anne McCluskey in their private and personal capacity, they are liable for the harm that they do. So anyone preventing Anne doing her duty of care and fulfilling her Hippocratic oath and under the law to prevent people from dying, they actually are engaged themselves in criminal activity, and it's contributory manslaughter or willful blindness. So simply if one doctor or one member of the public takes a case against the regulator or against the medical councils, that they are liable for, Anne's loss of reputation and her income, but also for preventing Anne and preventing other medical professionals and physicians around the world from saving lives and giving prevention and treatment early. So that's why it's actually quite simple to get out of this, because if we just hold one regulator to account, that will resonate. And we are all, in the World Doctors Alliance, the World Freedom Alliance, Medical Doctors for COVID Ethics, American Frontline Doctors, we're all on calls every week. And I was one of the ones before Christmas that just said we have to injunct to stop the clinical trials, which means just one case. And that case now has a crime number with Philip Hyland and Mark Sexton. And they are using that now to stop the injection centres around the UK. So I think we just need one case. So Anne would have standing, or any medical doctor, to take a case against the regulator.
Let me ask you this question on that basis, Dolores. Big tech that are doing across the board global censorship of someone posting factual data or opinion or analysis that could potentially save someone's life if they had a chance to have informed consent. So do you think the big tech, Silicon Valley, social media corporations, they could be held, CEOs or executives or even the employees could be held liable for denying the public informed consent? Is there an argument to be made there?
There is absolutely an argument, because we know in crimes against humanity, so in May 2020 as well, and since, this is all a playbook that has been written in detail over decades. So I read it, we'll say, in 1992, right? So they actually have a methodology of how to intimidate and destroy the reputation and livelihood of people who are speaking out. But of course, it is then, a lot of the headquarters of these international organizations are in Ireland. So therefore, we do have standing, and Anne and I have been entirely taken off of Facebook, apparently, because Bill Gates just said on one day, Dolores Cahill has to be taken down, and I can't even log in. And I think the Institute of Strategic Dialogue did a survey in the world for the major sources of so-called misinformation. And Dr. Vernon Coleman, who I admire, was number 2. Senator Dr. Scott Jensen was number 3 in the world. Senator Scott Jensen was number 2. And I'm number 1 as the allegedly, which is very damaging to my reputation. The number 1 source of medical misinformation in the world. So what I jokingly say is whatever I do, I'm the best at, right?
That's all.
Well, if I just add an anecdotal point there, I was speaking at Stormont nearly 18 months ago, and my microphone was taken off me for a very special lady who's sitting opposite here, but I didn't mind giving up the microphone for what I have been on record as calling the 21st century Che Guevara. And in a generation's time, pop culture, counterculture, it'll be...
And the T-shirts.
We'll be wearing of Dolores Cowan.
And Dr. Rana Tlusky.
Yes.
But I think, I'm really practical, right? So I think the thing is there are about 3 or 4 journalists and, 3 or 4 organizations that are headquartered in the nation of Éire. So I think that we actually, Anne and I, have standing. So the journalists, we should give them an opportunity to apologize and give us, an opportunity to redress, and particularly the Irish Times and the Irish Independent, for the initial times that they would approach giving you an hour or to respond. And from the very beginning, as a professor with an unblemished record, the journalist in the newspapers that wrote about me was the criminal correspondent, right? The crime correspondent. This was at the very beginning. So I think, again, in the rule of law, they are liable for their actions. And if they have shown to lie and misrepresent and be involved in deception for us, that is also to intimidate other people and to prevent them from speaking out. But the other thing is, if you look at the newspapers, they're now saying there's 10,000 cases of COVID every day, in order to instill fear. And in many of the crimes and crimes against humanity for the general population, journalists have been held to account, and most recently in Rwanda. So I would say in every nation around the world, they should make a list of the top 10 or 20 people that every day are prevention and treatment and information. And what's shocking really is that, we have our beloved, grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins that are elderly, and they are respecting people who are on the TV or on the media from the BBC, RTE, and around the world. And it's an absolute breach of trust for them to cause them to be fearful and to suffer and to not allow their grandchildren and their loved ones to be with them for many years now, but also not to be there and hold their hand when they are sick or when they are dying. And I think it is unconscionable, and we should say shame on them, and that why we are coming from a loving place to try and prevent them from causing harm and suffering to people. It's now time that we do have to hold them to account.
And that list you're talking about, I'm sure Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is on that list. The U.S. had the Dirty Dozen or something, the Biden administration, and Sire G, Kelly Brogan, all these wonderful people that they put, Dr. McCullough, I believe, Joseph McCullough, they put all these wonderful people.
Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, I was with her today, and Kevin Jenkins, who's a co-founder with me, an African-American in the Freedom Travel Alliance. In fact, there was a conference, we were on a Freedom Travel Alliance company call, and the Biden administration at the same time had a press conference with his spokesperson to say that he should, no longer live. Anyone who was on that list should no longer live. And then there were people, coming outside of his house in order to harm him. So I think it's when you look at what has happened around the world, in China, in Russia, in Germany, I remember as a child thinking, in the so-called Cultural Revolution in China, how could the education system turn children against their parents? Yeah. But in a way, we see the exact same tools of destroying the culture from Marx, Hegel, all the way through that cultural Marxism, political correctness, and all the way through Agenda 21. and the farce of the media that we have. And then we have, elections. We really need to take a good hard look at how the election process happens in our countries with independent observers and independent voting systems. And I think pretty soon what we need is people like Dr. Anne McCluskey, who has stood for election, and everybody to have the courage now to come out and stand even as independents and to actually, hold the politicians, the civil servants, and the so-called medical profession to account. And I also think any judges, retired judges, Supreme Court judges, and police listening to this, they really need to get together and to make phone calls and say this is a fundamental undermining of the rule of law and justice in our societies, and it's actually waking everybody up. And it only takes 1 in 500 of us. We only need very small numbers, because a lot of us are risk takers. We're quite entrepreneurial, and we also know we have a lot to learn. And there are literally, thousands of excellent people that are working together, sharing information, and, particularly as well in the money and financial systems, that it's actually not that difficult to sort the whole thing out. But I would be saying any of the civil servants and doctors, people working in the hotel, the hospital system, and the politicians, that by their neglect of their duty of care, of their position of responsibility, and engaging in malfeasance or malfeasance in public office, that they no longer deserve their salaries and their pensions, and that the so-called quarantine prisons that they're building, they will be, after a so-called fair trial and justice, that they will have to be held to account.
And there were a lot of people, and when this first started, everyone was hoping, they thought the opposition would come through politics. There would be some mavericks that would appear, and then people would rally around those mavericks, and we waited, and there were some Tory rebels in Westminster, but they weren't, against lockdown, but not really against the vaccine. The vaccine's got a kind of sacred, holy position there in this whole thing. So if we're going to sit around waiting for politicians to kind of get the light bulb up, it's not really, I'm not expecting it to happen now. So it's not going to come from politics, is it?
No, it's not. But I think, first of all, we need to look at the voting system, because I stood for election, and when the polling were closed, there should have been members of the police there. There were members from in a white, van that took away the votes. And because I took a photograph of the box that I put my vote into, 15 police came to the voting station, right? Not to collect the ballots, but and the ballots were taken away in a white van. Now, we got it all on video. And then, as they know, they didn't let me in to the voting ballots to see my votes being counted. So I think, it's the easy thing to do is we kind of have to look at the fundamental underpinning of our societies, and it's quite easy to do. We need to just have a court system where people who have harmed people are held to account, and if the judges and police don't do it, then they should be held to account. It's not that difficult. But if we take first a good hard look at the voting systems across the world, including open source and ways that you can track your vote online, that then we can really have free and transparent elections. Because I think what people don't realize, and I wrote a paper on it, Adverse Events and Medical Error, in 2018. I had to pay for it to be published, that 1 in 10 people die at the hands of the so-called health systems in the OECD countries. And that was an OECD report in 2017 and 2018. And for example, in the drug Vioxx, that killed more people than the Vietnam War. And it killed so many people in the first year that they only noticed it because 1 in 10 people were dying in America just from that one drug. And for vaccines in general, they contain the most toxic, it's like injecting asbestos or uranium, mercury and aluminium for 30 years, and that has caused huge harm. So I think for some people who may only think now we have an issue with this particular deception of a pandemic, that really there has been a nexus between Agenda 21, the kind of undermining of sovereignty in our nations across the world, and the implementation of the illness and cutting short people's lives has been through the pharmaceutical industry, the politicians, and the media.
Yeah, and just to backtrack on the point of accountability and stuff that Dolores was highlighting, they might be categorizing in their lists of most dangerous scientists that are putting out their so-called misinformation. Well, I had previously spoken in Derry a month ago, and I said, well, what we need to have in our response is, like, if you remember during the Gulf War, the Iraq War, that the neocons in America, they were producing this sort of glossy, like, they've got their pack of cards. Saddam Hussein was obviously the ace of spades, and they had all the different members of his regime, from the third of diamonds to the seven of clubs. So we need to be doing the same in every country. In every country, we need our pack of cards of lists of people that are complicit in this. Now, I'm not that vindictive that people that have thus far done damage to society, that they can't turn it around. Maybe they can, but there are certain individuals in this society, and I'm thinking of one party leader in the north of Ireland in particular. His days are over. He cannot seek, any type of freedom from prosecution, because he is instigated. He was the primary instigator of vaccine passports. That is beyond the pale. You do not come back from that.
Yeah. So just before we go on, we might go to a quick break before the final segment of Overdrive. But we're in Derry right now. We're broadcasting live. This is the Sunday Wire. I'm Patrick Henningsen. I'm here around the table with some fantastic people and individuals, and we're also surrounded by a studio audience. So just give yourself. Here in Derry, and do we have anybody from Donegal in the house? Yeah. So we've got representation from the South and from Northern Ireland.
They're Mexicans from the.
So look, we're going to take a short break here. We're broadcasting live on the Alternate Current Radio Network. This is the Sunday Wire. We'll be right back in just a few minutes.
He's been following this man for 10 years. Tony met Tony doesn't get employed much, you know what I mean? But
that's okay.
Tony's been my friend. She's taken him to get out When my son wants to come, my daughter wants to come. You've met James from the Dairy Girls. My daughter went around collecting the name. We should be like that to get up and did a speech. She did our teacher
They're great. Microphones are okay.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. You're listening to the Sunday Wire. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stCenturyWire.com. Thank you for rejoining us here. We're on a live broadcast. We're on the road in Northern Ireland. We're broadcasting from Derry, and I've got some wonderful people in attendance. We've got some fantastic guests. We've been joined earlier by Dr. Ian McCloskey and also by David McCollum, Dr. Dolores Cahill, got Gregory Sharkey here as well on the roundtable, event organizer from today. And so we've also got on the line, we'll connect him in a few minutes, Basil Valentine is going to join us on the live link in just a couple of minutes, and he might have a few questions for some of our guests. And so we're back again. So so Dolores, I've watched you on videos for like 2 years. So this is the first time we've actually met in person. So it's
I'm a great fan.
As I am of you too. It's just fantastic. It's a little bit weird because we have all these virtual relationships. I'm sure you have a lot of new virtual friends and colleagues around the world. And so there's a lot to keep track of. And you've got a massive network, activists, health professionals, doctors, scientists, all sorts of different people.
Yeah, and I've been in touch with governments around the world as well, and current and former retired and current serving in NATO and in a lot of the military organizations, and there are a lot of kings and princes on our side as well as the military. So I would have experience as well in that kind of communications, and because when I worked in the European Union, I was in the unit for the global coordination of the world. So I have spent about 20 years or so interacting with governments. And when I worked in the EU, I worked between the European Union and Asia, including China and South Korea. So from those relationships, I would know a lot of people that are good in international organizations. And of course, we're working very closely with the 4 million veterans as well in the United Kingdom. But all of it goes back to many of the military are actually, and police, are actually, their hearts are broken because many of them, went into service in the military to, follow on the tradition to defend our freedoms. And what's really been attacked here, people in a way just need to reflect. It's all about your freedom to travel. That means, to meet your family and your loved ones and to engage in business, your freedom of speech and your freedom to decide what happens to your body if you don't want to wear a mask, or that if somebody is trying to coerce you into taking one of the most deadly injections in the world in order to keep your job, to provide for your family. So really this is very simply an assault on our culture and on the way of life, and many of the military around the world have dedicated their lives to defend those freedoms, and we are all networked now. So while I'm very honored, I was just in touch with Rainer Fulmich this morning and all of the doctors in the world. And at very short notice, people drop what they're doing to come on to Zooms or to support court cases or injunctions around the world. But I think what I would like to do is just to give people huge confidence that really what we have is we're building a network that is required to have a new society. And what I don't see is that new society in each of our nations, it's not separate in some rural place. That what I'm saying is we are building the new society in the middle and all around them. And really, children should not have to have something taking an unnecessary test or be coerced in order to get an operation or in order to go to school. The elderly and people, I know women who have been coerced to getting the most deadly injection for their baby in order to give birth in hospital, and the same with their husbands or the father of the child. So this is, an absolute assault on our bodily integrity and our freedom of speech. And perhaps it had to get this bad for the large proportion of the world to realize that really World War III has been happening since 1945 and now, and it's an assault on the very fabric of our culture, but also an undermining of our education systems, and that the medical profession have been taught incorrectly, as have the people that present themselves as the police and the law. And I have huge hope, because when you understand simply that a doctor would be like Dr. Anne McCloskey, they have to do everything in the best interest, and they have to give all of the information to the person they're trying to help or heal, and then it's up to that person to decide what will go into their body or what decision they will make, including not to be treated. So that all actually simplifies everything. So what they're trying to do is undermine and cause fear and isolate families and isolate people from their friendship groups and their neighbors. It's almost like the game is up, you know? The emperor has no clothes, and one of the easiest ways, it's very simply all people need to do is spend a little time getting themselves healthy, drink clean water, you know, look at their vitamin D, but then just say, you know what will really keep me healthy is once a week or twice a week to either volunteer or to join a choir or just simply bring people into your little kitchen and just, you know, sing, decide what can you do, volunteer to give something back in society, and then try and protect yourself by being innovative and not being dependent on the state, and then help us in the groups around the world like World Doctors Alliance, World Freedom Alliance, Custodian.com, and a lot of the great organizations, and Freedom Travel Alliance, and, you know, Doctors for COVID Ethics, American Frontline Doctors. So I think in the initial, we are in a unique transition time now in 2022. I think it's probably in the last 2,000 years the most amazing, wonderful time to be alive.
Absolutely.
And I think that in order to really, you know, build the world that we want to live, it may take a generation. But I think that children will not take these injections. You know, parents, the emperor has no clothes. Probably none of these injections or vaccines are necessary. And once we have a mechanism to hold one regulator or one member of NEFIT to account, we can then turn our eyes to why are they putting in cancer-causing substances into the water? And whoever is doing that in the water companies in our nations is accountable. And the same thing, whatever regulator is rolling out 5G and they are being installed in our homes at 1 million times higher than they need to be, that we can use the exact same mechanism to hold people to account. It may take a number of years, but I have great hope.
Yeah, and just to further on that there, you know, I do see 2022 as our year. I pick up on it in my taxi, you know, even among the vaccinated, particularly among the vaccinated people that have said enough's enough now. Maybe 50% of them may take the boosters if they're applied behavioral psychology and threats and stuff, but I think that there may be up to 50% that will not, and they become the new anti-vaxxers, in quotes. I do see 2022 it being the year of change, but it may take until the middle of next year or the middle of this year before it erupts and becomes a tidal wave. And I think that the change is coming this year.
I think the thing that's amazing is it will take time, but soon the masses of people who are slightly asleep, they'll come to realize that people like you, Anne, or people like Dolores, or all of your colleagues, David and everybody, that they're not taking the stance they're taking because they want to harm people, because this is what the government, the media, and social media executives and all these pundits in WHO land are saying, that they're the anti-vaxxers are costing lives. No, you're doing it because you care about people, because you care about their well-being, their safety. Hold on. All right, welcome back. Sorry about the technical delay there. Our connection was shot down for some strange reason. But hey, we're back online now with an alternative connection. And we're back. We're here live broadcasting in Derry here, and I'm with some fantastic guests. We're in the final segment of Overdrive. And in a few minutes, we'll connect Basil for the last 15 minutes. But I think I was just making a point before that the whole point is that the people who are deriding you, Anne, and Dolores and everybody, are accusing you of putting lives at risk. But it's just the opposite. And I think it's just a question of time before reasonable people understand that you're looking out for people's best interests. You care about them. Yeah.
What I have always said from the start of this is I would love to be wrong. I would love if everything that they accuse me of lying about was actually a lie. It would be wonderful, because I'm an old lady and I actually don't care what happens to me, but I do deeply care about what happens to people of this town, this nation, my family. You know, I care, and you know, all of us are the same. All of the people in this room are the same. They're here because they have skin in the game. We care about what comes after us, and we understand that life is actually not that terribly precious, but freedom is a fundamental. And, you know, that's it. So
Yeah. So
to be wrong would be sweet.
yeah, I would love to. We'd all love to be wrong. We'd all love to be wrong. So
Yeah, and I suppose all of us are doing it as well, not just for the people that we know, but for the people of the world, you know? And there is many, many layers to this. It's almost like an onion, you know? And we are looking at the so-called pandemic and, you know, PCRs and COVID-19. But I suppose the real layer that will only come out in the months and years is that in these injections, so-called vaccines, there have been agents of infertility, which is well recognized. So in the tetanus injections, they had an agent that is required for, we'll say, a fertilized embryo to implant in the womb. It's called human gonadotropin hormone. And, you know, people who are getting a tetanus injection would not expect that they could be infertile from it. And the same thing we know for the human papillomavirus HPV injection, that within 10 or 15 years after that, the 12-year-olds go into premature menopause or are unable. And from when these clinics are unable to have children, and we know from the first week of the injections for the IVF, for doctors who are working, you know, with men and women who had got injected in IVF, we'll say in April of 2021, that where they had successful fertilized embryos, if one of the mother or father had one injection, there was no fertilized embryos, and that's been known from the beginning of these clinical trials. So that is why it is absolutely unconscionable to be injecting children and teenagers and people who are of the age that they could become parents themselves. So now, while that is worrying, I think we will be working with all of the amazing doctors around the world to try and protect people's fertility. And if this becomes more evident, one of the biggest programs that we will have to do is to try and protect and conserve their fertility in the months and years to come. So I think that's why many of us have really put our, you know, as much as we can on the line to stop the injection, and people, I would definitely say, should not get the boosters as well. So
in the hierarchy of concerns, generally, of what we're talking about, what you just mentioned there, I would put that at number one.
Children. That's why groups of us here in Derry and in towns and cities across Ireland are standing at school gates, giving leaflets to parents, giving leaflets to children. You know, you need to connect with people where they are. And I have to say, in the working states of Derry, in the Craigan, the Bogside, the Brandywell, we're going door to door, and the parents are standing saying, look, I've taken 2 jags. I did it for my parents. I did it because I want to travel or whatever, but no way are they getting my children. And as long as that happens, as I say, then I'm very hopeful, because once people realise that it is their children are going to be at risk from this, then the game's over.
Right, and I had a horrific case in my taxi affair, a young girl who was vulnerable, maybe 18, 19 years of age, who was living in sheltered accommodation. And she got into my car and she said, you know, I've just been boosted. Yes, it's like 36 hours ago. And so, of course, I continued the conversation, and she was asking her questions. She had the booster the previous day. She slept or couldn't sleep for 24 hours. She was palpitations. And then she slept all the second day, the afternoon, and was in the car late in the evening. And she said, if I was a girl, I could have felt her, clothes. And she said that they were soaking wet, still sweating. But she went on then to tell me that she gave birth 2 days into lockdown, the first lockdowns, and she said because she had asthma and she received anesthetic during her childbirth, that it brought back on the asthma, and of course they thought it was COVID, and they took the child from her for 24 hours, put the child in an incubator, and allowed the mother in the first 24 hours, when the child in those stages needs the closeness, the touch of the mother, the child was removed by these fascists in the health service, because that's what they've become. Unfortunately, that's what they've become. And the mother in her first 24 hours could only see her child through a Zoom.
Yeah, ridiculous. Insane. But we're joined on the line, I think on the live, we got our roving correspondent, Basil Valentine, joining us on the live link right now. Hello, Basil, are you there?
Good evening, Patrick. Good to be with you all.
Great to be with you. You sound fantastic, crystal clear, like you're just next door. Basil, do we have any Basil Valentine fans?
Yeah.
That's your appreciation society there, Basil. So, Basil, you've been listening to this broadcast. It's been amazing. Do you have any questions for any of the guests that we've got around the table here?
Only what's the public mood in Northern Ireland? We've got this disconnect whereby the vaccine narrative has, if you look at the evidence, if you dig around, completely collapsed. Thousands of boosters being thrown away, we've heard today. Calvin Robinson on GB News managed to actually say live on air on a mainstream platform that they were dangerous. But it hasn't filtered through to the mainstream media yet, let alone some of our European counterparts, like the Austrians, who are going to start fining people over 2,000 euros from February. So first of all, I should imagine that for all the travails over the border, you're jolly glad we're not in the European Union and subject to any of their edicts where vaccinations are concerned. And secondly, what's the mood on the street? Obviously, it's a bit of an echo chamber with social media and amongst activists. But, are there lots of diehard COVID narrative adherents who, even in the face of the evidence now, are still sticking with the official line?
Let's go to Anne for Northern Ireland. After that, I want to hear Dolores' south of the border assessment of that. But Anne, what's your take on this?
Well, today we had a street event, and the numbers were double what they were for the street event we had 2 weeks ago, and 10 times the number that we had 6 months ago. So I think, people are waking up. I also do believe that there are a huge number of people who are beginning now to doubt very much what's going on around them. The thing has just become so dystopian, but who haven't yet found the courage to stand up. And I also think people, the vilification that people like Professor Cahill and other people far more worthy than I, but the way that our names are being, we're just being discredited and discounted and insulted. And I think that is a chilling factor for people. And I understand that. I know literally, I'm in touch with 5 or 6 senior hospital consultants in the north of Ireland who are absolutely aware of what's going on and are afraid to speak out. And people like me losing my license to practice are saying to those people, don't even think about it. But I think eventually, and I think the time is going to be soon, whenever they realise that they can no longer, in conscience, stand silent, while particularly our children are being put at risk. So I'm hopeful, and as I say, we don't write the playbook for this, and the mainstream media won't be showing us stuff unless it's part of. I still don't trust them. They're still very much embedded in the agenda. So, but I think ordinary people, and certainly the way to find out the mood of a country is go door to door in the working class housing estates. And we've been doing that for months now. And certainly, as I say, in the places where there's a child poverty index of 60% in Derry, they are wide awake.
And so Dolores, down in the Republic, what's your feeling on this?
Yeah, I think, they also exaggerate the numbers of people that are injected. Just so you know, what they do is they might bring 1,000 or 2,000 in vials that you could inject. And then if only, 8 people turn up, they actually count if there is adverse events over the 2,000 possible injections, and they count the total number as the numbers in each of our nations, so it's part of the propaganda to make it seem like.
What does that translate in terms of percentage? What's your ballpark?
My ballpark is probably, in reality, 40% will say are probably injected at least once. But as what Anne was saying, is it is all connected. What they are trying to undermine our reputations in the trusted or the old media, we'll say. But I'm invited about 2 days a week now. I drive around rural Ireland and go into, community clubs or into people's kitchens. And usually there's about 100 people there. And then what's really good about that is that anyone who comes to see me talk or just to chat and get a feel of what's going on, they also can identify which of their neighbours are actually on board. So I think there's a huge groundswell, but I think it's a bit like, in the north where we have people from all aspects of the community, and the same with the African Americans in America. People are actually waking up to the kind of similar propaganda, whether it's based on, false divisions about religion or colors of your skin, or of this vaccine, no vaccine type narrative, and that people of all generations and communities are coming together. So there is a huge groundswell. But I think what people are also interested in is we know that there is potentially in their playbook, a banking crash, hyperinflation, shortages of food, or that they're going to instigate some type of, another assault or a war. And people are now looking at the mainstream media, pulling out their various, whether it's hyperinflation or worrying about banking crashes as part of their playbook. But I think the other thing people need to be aware is even 20 years ago, they are going to ease off on this now, right? Because they realize in the next summer, that this summer, they can't really keep it going. So I think what people on our side need to be aware is just because they could remove the masks and the injection, it doesn't mean that they can come back with another pandemic in a year or 2 years, that we still have to potentially invest an hour or two a week into either working against the underlying aspect of what's going on, or in some way to support voluntary groups in their community to push back, and not just think if they stop the masks and the injection and the coercion that suddenly life is really back to normal. It isn't.
Because there's a system that's in place, like after the war on terror, that never went away, even though the threat of Islamic terror, so to speak, disappeared. We still have to strip off at airports and walk through body scanners and be presumed guilty until scanned or something like this.
Because it's very interesting. If you look back, say, at 1913, and the same year, they undermined the system of health that was there, and they undermined the system of money creation and banking. It's all connected. So, and then you can go further back and see, like in Ireland, in the so-called potato famine or the Holocaust, that they actually were systematically undermining nations that have traditions like England and Ireland and in the United States, and cultures like in Africa, that they were trying to remove them from their history, remove any kind of accountability, and then impose some kind of a foreign power by stealth, we'll say, like by corrupting the 1918 election that we had here, and then instigating a civil war that was false, and then not establishing properly the court system in Ireland, or even the state of Ireland. So we can see that it's the same in Canada and the United States, in many countries around
Australia
as well. So I think in a way what's beautiful is that we are all now, in The Emperor Has No Clothes, locking people, so-called, into their houses has given people the time to actually, study this. But there are people in each of our nations that might have been an expert in the law or in healing, or in medications or in food or what plants will, grow properly, that we're all connecting now because people have taken the time in their lives to connect. And so it's almost like in a divine spiritual way, in every nation, the components required to really reboost a healthy, wonderful world of justice and accountability. All of the people were there, and they're now just coming together to form one very cohesive unit that will be the foundation stone for the new and honest culture. Because I think what people are sick of is, and it's very stressful, when people are being lied to all the time, and when people who are corrupt are benefiting from it and they're not being held to account. So people, it resonates in their core, in their morality and their conscience. And now people can see, I was right all along. And a lot of us, courage is a choice, right? And so it's all about a domino effect. If we can get the message out, and that's why your radio show is wonderful, and I'm on tntradio.live as well, that once people hear it, they go, it resonates entirely, and all the decades of propaganda will shatter. And that's why a lot of us are actually building new banking systems, new ways of communication, using Monero privacy coins, establishing independent distributed means of communication around the world, and then taking a good hard look to purify the water, eat food locally from in the countries grown by our farmers. They need to get a good price, and then just restoring and educating about the law and holding people to account.
And that's Basil, do you have anything to?
I was about to ask Basil, did he get his question answered?
Yeah, Basil, do you have any? Basil, we're wrapping up. Do you have anything to respond or add to that?
No, it's
well, only that on the propaganda front, we had the good news today that the BBC license fee will be abolished from 2027.
Oh, BBC license fee will be abolished from 2027. Let's give a big round of applause.
But what are they putting in its place?
Well, hopefully,
pay-per-view,
or just take out a subscription to the UK column or 21st Century. It's much cheaper, and
the old media.
You get better bang for your buck. But that's great news, Basil. Thank you for ending it on a high note, as you normally do. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and on another high note, the word on the street is that virtually all the remaining COVID restrictions in the UK will be swept away by the end of the month, unless, of course, somebody manages to come up with some new deadly variant.
New variant, yeah.
But at the moment, we're on course to go back to something like normal, in stark contrast to Australia and most of mainland Europe.
Which begs the question, what have they got up their sleeve?
Well, when Merlin will emerge from his cave with conjuring a new little demon, a new variant, we have to be ready for that, basically.
Well, ironically, and for all his faults, we should be grateful for having Boris, because a lot of people have been saying over the last few days that it's the globalists, it's them or whatever that want him out, because he hasn't been authoritarian enough, and his libertarian instincts have meant that we've stepped back from the extremes of mainland Europe, Australia, or even the Republic of Ireland, and indeed that journalists are being briefed by insiders to undermine him so that he can be replaced by somebody more in tune with the global agenda. So, for all his faults, to be honest, I'm glad he's there. But would you really rather have Keir Starmer?
No, I'm not having that. Sorry. The great British public, I think, actually are schooled in the notions of freedom and that. It's not up to Boris. No, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't take that.
You're hitting a wall of skepticism here, Basil.
Not going there, no. Sorry, Basil. I love you, but
he's an optimist. Basil's he's a glass half full type of guy.
Well, Keir Starmer is a more gratuitous, horrible figure than Boris. So, I mean,
what did the people do to deserve this choice?
I'm with Greg on that.
It's a case of out of the fire, or out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Yeah, put a trilateralist in charge. That would be an absolute nightmare. But hey, it's politics. 6 or 1.
It's over. Party's over. Not having it.
The party's over. The party's over, and so is this special edition. But hey, listen, this has been a fantastic roadshow episode of the Sunday Wire, and big thanks to everybody. Thank you, Greg, for helping to bring me over, for starters. Gregory Sharkey, and also big thanks to all of our guests today, David McCollum, Dolores Cahill, Ann McCloskey, and everybody, and also our amazing studio audience here upstairs at the
And the musicians.
And the musicians. Well, yes, absolutely.
Never forget the musicians.
And everybody listening, thank you very much. And listen, I'm going to remind everybody that this would not be possible. We have a brand new mobile studio, new microphones, and it's because of our listeners at the Sunday Wire, 21st Century Wire. Those of you who chipped in on the winter fundraising drive, we upgraded and we're here. We're on the road. It's worked tremendously well. So thank you to everybody out there. We'll give you guys a shout next week. We'll do a roll call for everybody that jumped in to help out. So it's been amazing. And the people of Derry have been amazing. They came out in good numbers today with a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm.
Chucky Arla, no surrender.
It's another one of Greg's.
Chucky Arla.
Greg, you should be copywriting all of these things.
well, you use them Coroni Baloney and Billy Goats.
Billy Goats, Billy Goats has been very popular, by the way.
We could have a show about that madman all by himself.
But thank you, everybody. And look, that we're going to wrap things up this week. Thank you to ACR, of course, Alternate Current Radio. Big shout out to Hesher, who's anchoring the show, the ship down in there in Austin, Texas. And we're going to have to wrap it up because we're being moved along here, schedules, and we need to get dinner.
Yeah.
So, but everybody here in the upstairs here, you're all invited to come down, join us. We'll get drinks and dinner, whatever. And
Party time now.
It's
Work's done.
It's been a great roadshow episode. Thank you, Basil Valentine, our roving correspondent for culture and sport as well. Thank you, Basil.
Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, take care, everybody. It's been fantastic, and we'll catch you guys next week, same time, same place. All the best.
Bye bye, everyone. God bless.
Bye bye.
You have.
Good news, boppers. The big alert has been called off. It turns out that the early reports were wrong. All wrong. Now, for that group out there that had such a hard time getting home, sorry about that. I guess the only thing we can do is play you a song.
What is it about Brennan's Be Good range that people everywhere are picking it off the shelves? Kate in Dungannon writes, I can't believe bread this tasty has only 60 calories a slice. Shocked cat face emoji. Lovely. Well, if you know the Be Good bakers, you know nothing's ever good enough until it's perfect. However you slice it, anything baked is better with Brennan's. Brennan's. Today's bread today.